Obi-Wan Kenobi won nearly every duel he ever fought, yet the galaxy still fell on his watch. He trained the boy who became Darth Vader, watched the Republic collapse, and spent 19 years hiding in a desert while the Empire enslaved billions. Most people trace his failure to Mustafar, to Anakin, to the moment when things went wrong. The real question was never whether Kenobi failed, it was whether being the perfect Jedi was still enough to save anyone. Before Kenobi ever held a lightsaber as a knight, his nature was already set. In Master and Apprentice, Qui-Gon Jinn privately reflects on the distance between himself and his 17-year-old apprentice. He believes in dealing with each situation on its own terms. The young Padawan wants procedures to follow. Qui-Gon values flexibility. Kenobi sees it as sloppiness. Where the older Jedi has always kept his independence from the Council, his student thinks he must obey the Council in every particular, at all times, and is horrified whenever his master bends a protocol. None of this made Obi-Wan a bad Jedi. Qui-Gon acknowledges that many of the best knights think and act exactly this way. The gap between them was not about talent, it was about temperament. And it was serious enough that Qui-Gon went so far as to tell the Council he and his Padawan were a deep mismatch, and that the blame for it belonged to him alone. He even considered accepting a seat on the Council, partly because it would give Obi-Wan a transfer to a better-suited master without placing any blame on the boy. He never made that transfer. In his own internal monologue, the young Padawan reveals just how deep the instinct runs. He values rules because they can be memorized, written down, studied, made certain. They're the opposite of Qui-Gon's ancient mystical writings, which Kenobi finds borderline pointless. However, that instinct for certainty would eventually blind Kenobi to the one threat he could not memorize, study, or prepare for. Qui-Gon was unable to shake the feeling that the Jedi Order itself had started down a dark path. He believed the Order had become more focused on acting as enforcers for politicians than fulfilling its oath as peacekeepers. Others shared this fear, including Sifo-Dyas, a Jedi Master who once held a council seat, but they were ignored. Qui-Gon himself was offered a seat on the council. He turned it down. Obi-Wan could have accepted without hesitation. The Jedi Order was built to produce exactly the kind of knight who followed orders without question, fought without complaint, and took the institution that raised him on faith. By every traditional measure, Kenobi succeeded at becoming that Jedi more completely than anyone in his generation. In the Legends Revenge of the Sith novelization, Kenobi is a devastating warrior who would rather not fight, a phenomenal pilot who doesn't like to fly, a negotiator without peers who prefers to sit alone in a quiet cave and meditate. The Council assigns him their most important questions. Other masters hold him up as the model. He is modest, centered, and always kind. Yet inside, he still feels like a Padawan. In Qui-Gon's view, Obi-Wan's greatest flaw had always been his rigid, clenched jaw attitude need to be absolutely correct. That rigidity was the thing Qui-Gon had tried and failed to loosen, and it would follow Kenobi into every crisis that came next. On the war-ravaged world of Carnelian 4, a 12-year-old Anakin Skywalker stands amid the ruins of a dead civilization and asks why the Jedi let this planet destroy itself. The surface is littered with wrecked airships and collapsed cities. Two warring factions, the open and the closed, have been fighting for so long that neither side remembers why the war started. Kenobi fell back on the Order's limits. Senate jurisdiction, 10,000 Jedi spread across the galaxy, not enough hands for every crisis. Anakin pushed back. The system should change. Kenobi could only say he hoped it would. It is peacekeeping at its most creative. A Jedi using the system's own weight to force a ceasefire between people who have forgotten how to stop killing each other. That system was about to hand Kenobi a burden that no amount of creativity could carry. Qui-Gon Jinn died on Naboo with a Sith Lord's blade through his chest and a promise on his lips: train the boy. Obi-Wan barely passed his own trials, knelt over his master's body and agreed. Had Qui-Gon survived and Maul been defeated, Anakin would have been raised under the calm guidance of a seasoned teacher. Qui-Gon's deep compassion for the former slave might have led to a very different outcome, and Palpatine, the Sith Lord hiding behind the Senate, may have had a far more difficult time bending the boy's future. Instead, Anakin got Obi-Wan. From Kenobi's perspective, it was the boy who got the war steel. Kenobi saw himself as a grief-stricken 25-year-old with no experience training anyone, still grieving the death of his own master. If he was powerless to save Qui-Gon at the moment it mattered most, he had no reason to believe he could guide anyone else. The Council made it worse. Yoda was the lone voice of dissent when they approved the training, concerned by the fear he sensed in the boy. In his darkest moments, Anakin remembered something he had overheard as a child. Obi-Wan had once called him dangerous. The remark embedded itself in the boy's mind. No matter how hard he tried to shake it, in moments of despair, it surfaced as what he believed was the ugly truth. That Kenobi was stuck with an apprentice he had never wanted. In a private conversation, Yoda tells Obi-Wan that if Anakin chooses to leave the Order, Kenobi must leave too, to honor his vow to Qui-Gon. His identity as a Jedi was chained to Anakin's staying. Kenobi did not know that someone had already started pulling the chain from the other end. Within years of Anakin's arrival at the temple, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine inserted himself into the boy's life. He approached Mace Windu directly, claiming a personal bond with the boy and pressing the point that the Jedi served the Senate, which meant they served him. Windu let it happen. Kenobi, focused on training and the code, had no idea any of it was happening. The Chancellor took the boy beneath the surface of Coruscant. He showed him corruption, gambling, the rot hiding underneath the Republic's gleaming towers. Palpatine quietly clawed at Anakin's emotional wounds while forging the first link in their bond. Then he asked Anakin to keep what he had seen a secret. It would be theirs alone. To Anakin, the Chancellor became the one adult who was always present, always welcoming, and always ready with advice. He treated Anakin with a kindly, unconditional acceptance exactly as he is, the kind of validation the young Jedi can never get from another member of the Order, not even from Obi-Wan. Palpatine offered warmth without conditions, Kenobi offered discipline with love underneath, and one of them was lying. Then the war began, a war designed not to be won, but to destroy the very system Obi-Wan had spent his whole life defending. The Clone Wars transformed the Jedi Order overnight. In the canon novel Brotherhood, dark forces pushed the Jedi further towards their transformation from guardians to soldiers. Obi-Wan and Anakin found themselves on equal footing, yet opposite paths, each trying to define peace and justice during a time of industrial war. Kenobi adapted, as he always did. He became a general, a strategist, a council member. He reflected on sitting in a council chair that Qui-Gon never occupied, not because his master couldn't have earned it, but because Qui-Gon chose not to. The seat fit Obi-Wan poorly, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Yoda expressed a rare disgust at what the war had done, noting that the scope of the conflict had gone far beyond the peacekeeping tradition of the Jedi. Underneath every campaign, a pattern was building that Obi-Wan missed entirely. On Naboo, he cut Darth Maul in half and avenged his master. It was the defining victory of his youth, and it changed nothing. Sidious, the real Sith Lord, was untouched. He simply recruited Dooku as his next apprentice and continued his plan without losing a single day. On Geonosis, Kenobi survived an arena execution and helped launch the Republic's first military victory in 1,000 years. The result was exactly what Palpatine had engineered, a galaxy-wide war fought with a clone army the Sith had secretly commissioned. The Republic and Palpatine were fighting very different wars with very different goals. The battles mattered to the soldiers and Jedi risking their lives. They were irrelevant to the man who had already decided how it would end. But Palpatine still needed one final victory before his trap could close. When Kenobi tracked down and killed General Grievous on Utapau near the war's end, removing the last military leader the Separatists had, he unknowingly cleared the final obstacle from Palpatine's path. Within hours of that victory, Order 66 was activated. The Jedi were hunted across the galaxy by the very soldiers that they had led into battle. If you want to see more breakdowns like this one, a quick subscribe means you will always be the first to know. Kenobi survived. Most of the Order did not. Duchess Satine of Mandalore, a woman Obi-Wan had once loved, saw this more clearly than he did. Across multiple encounters during the Clone Wars, Satine confronted Kenobi with what the Jedi had become. She remembered peacekeepers, she saw generals, she wanted to know whether his order had abandoned its ideals out of necessity or convenience. Kenobi had no good answer. On Mustafar, he defeated Anakin Skywalker in single combat and left him burning on the lava bank. Vader burned, was rebuilt, and spent the next 2 decades enforcing the Empire. Through all of it, Kenobi carried something else the Order was never supposed to allow, a love he could not speak out loud, and a grief the Order gave him no room to process. During a hostage crisis aboard the Coronet, Kenobi admitted something he had never said out loud before. He would have left the Jedi Order for her if she had asked. He lived by the Jedi Code, and Anakin knew it. But Yoda's lessons on detachment always left something out: the remorse that came with it. When Anakin pressed him on whether he and Satine had ever been more than friends, Kenobi deflected entirely, treating it as irrelevant to the mission at hand. The conversation died before it started. Years later, Maul used the Duchess as bait. He had seized control of Mandalore through a puppet government and knew that because the planet was neutral, the Jedi had no jurisdiction there. If Kenobi came to rescue her, he would have to come alone. Kenobi came anyway. He borrowed Anakin's ship, flew to Mandalore without council approval, infiltrated the capital in stolen armor, and found Satine in her cell. They almost escaped, but they didn't. When Kenobi refused to give in to anger in the throne room, Maul ignited the darksaber and pulled Satine onto its blade. She died in Obi Wan's arms. Her last words, a confession of love she had carried her entire life. Maul did not kill him. He ordered Kenobi locked away to drown in his grief. The Jedi Master endured the loss through discipline and never broke. Kenobi showed affection through sacrifice, protection, duty, and shared hardship. Over time, he came to see Anakin as a brother, an equal, a partner. That bond could not replace what the troubled young man craved above all else: a parent's love and guidance. Anakin always found his senses tuned to emotions at a far deeper level than other Jedi, maybe because he actually let himself feel them. He needed verbal reassurance, openness, and permission to be vulnerable. Obi-Wan, trained since childhood to channel emotion into discipline, could not give him those things. Not because he didn't care, because the Order never taught him how. There was one attempt. Kenobi once tried to draw Anakin out by offering his own experience with Satine as a starting point for an honest conversation about attachment. Obi-Wan was sure that getting Anakin to admit his feelings was the first step in working through them. Anakin shut him down, fiercely denying that he and Padme were anything more than friends. The moment passed. It would never come again. Anakin wished for Obi-Wan to be the kind of person he could tell. Not a different person, just a version of the same man who could hear the truth without turning it into a lesson about the code. Anakin and Obi-Wan were closer than friends, closer than brothers. Neither could imagine life without the other. Yet Anakin could tell Palpatine things he could never share with his master. The Jedi Code taught him that attachment was dangerous. Obi-Wan placed his faith in every pillar of the Republic. Not one of them would hold. The Jedi believed the Sith Lord they were hunting was someone who wanted to seize control of the galaxy. They never considered that he might be someone who already had it. Palpatine displayed a carved relief of an ancient battle between Jedi and Sith in his own office for years. The Jedi who visited that office regularly never noticed. The Republic itself was already rotting. Palpatine did not create its problems. He used them. The bribes, the block legislation, the decades of inaction in the Senate, all of it existed before Palpatine ever took office. Control of the Republic was never seized. It was presented to Palpatine by a Senate too exhausted by war to object. Meanwhile, the clone troopers Obi-Wan commanded as brothers carried chips in their skulls, programmed to turn on their Jedi generals at a single command. Anakin himself had seen a warning. A clone named Tup turned on a Jedi in battle. Another clone, Fives, tried to warn everyone about a conspiracy that reached the Chancellor's office. Palpatine waved it off as an isolated defect, and the young Jedi chose to believe him. Kenobi's consistency stands out against everyone around him. Dooku abandoned the Order, Anakin broke the code, Barriss betrayed the Republic, and Ahsoka walked away from the only life she had known. Even Yoda eventually admitted that the Jedi had been wrong. Obi-Wan never did. He guarded Luke Skywalker for 19 years, even after the Council, the Republic, the Clone Army, and Anakin had all fallen. Then Order 66 happened, and the man who trusted everything was left with nothing. Obi-Wan and Yoda returned to the Jedi Temple and walked through the aftermath. The twisted bodies of fallen Padawans and younglings, scarred by lightsaber blades, were scattered across the temple floors. Kenobi watched the holo recordings. He saw Anakin moving through the corridors with a calculated calm that was barely recognizable. The Council and the Republic had been destroyed. The code he had followed his entire life meant nothing. The person he had given his entire adult life trying to save had become the weapon that ended it all. After the fall, Kenobi delivered the newborn Luke Skywalker to Owen and Beru Lars on Tatooine. He did not consider himself equipped to become a father. He was 38 years old and had never raised a child, so he stood guard from a distance, living in an abandoned hovel beyond the Dune Sea, surviving on next to nothing. He had repented the part he had unwittingly played in the fall of the Jedi and the Republic. Now the only mission left was to make sure that fall had not been permanent. In the years that followed, the galaxy forgot the Jedi. Most people who remembered the Jedi at all considered the Order an ancient, cult-like religion devoted to an energy that probably never existed. The Empire was content to let those stories die. Kenobi let himself age. His hair turned gray. He studied the Tusken Raiders and their culture, trying to understand the violence that surrounded him. He subsisted on whatever he could trade for with the Jawas. It took 10 years, but eventually he learned to commune with Qui-Gon's spirit through the Force, finally hearing the voice of the master he had lost on Naboo. He watched Luke from afar as the boy grew into a young man. He rarely interfered. In the canon comic Obi Wan, set during this exile, the cost of that restraint was constant. When a squad of Imperial stormtroopers was ambushed and killed by Tusken Raiders during a sandstorm, Kenobi scavenged the aftermath for supplies and found one trooper still alive. He removed the man's helmet and saw the face of a conscript, nothing like the clones he had once led into battle, but the sight of dead soldiers in white armor pulled him back to the war, back to comrades who had turned on him at a single command. He carried the wounded man to his hut and nursed him for 3 days. When the trooper woke up and spotted Kenobi's lightsaber on display, he called him a sorcerer, panicked, and fled back to the Empire. Qui-Gon had taught him that protecting life was a purpose beyond all other loyalties, so Kenobi saved his enemy and sent him home, knowing it would change nothing except the weight he carried back into the desert that night. Nearly 2 decades into his exile, a young rebel named Ezra Bridger landed on Tatooine, hoping to recruit Kenobi for the fight against the Empire. In the canon animated series Star Wars Rebels, Ezra was certain the rebellion needed Kenobi. The old Jedi turned him away. The boy already had everything the fight required, and by coming to Tatooine, he was putting it at risk. Kenobi sent him home. Kenobi's war was not the rebellion's war anymore. His mission had shrunk to a single child on a moisture farm. Then Maul arrived. The former Sith apprentice had tracked Kenobi across the desert, driven by decades of hatred. Maul mocked him as a rat hiding in the sand. Kenobi's response was calm. He had risen above everything Maul still clung to. The duel lasted seconds. Kenobi adopted Qui-Gon's lightsaber stance, a deliberate choice, and when Maul lunged with the same strike that had killed Qui-Gon on Naboo, Kenobi was ready. He parried and cut through both the weapon and the man behind it. As Maul collapsed, Kenobi caught him. In his final moments, Maul realized what Kenobi had been guarding on Tatooine. Kenobi's silence told Maul everything. The dying man found a strange peace. The Chosen One, he believed, would avenge them both. Then, he was gone. Kenobi closed his eyes out of pity and respect for an enemy who had stalked him most of his life, murdered his master, killed a woman he loved, and in the end, shared the same hope. In his journal, Kenobi recorded one final belief. Through these long years, he may have seemed alone, but he was not. No one is, even in their darkest hour. Whether it was enough, the galaxy never got to decide. The Jedi's greatest failure was not produced by its worst student. It was produced by its best one. Obi Wan Kenobi was not the Jedi who failed the Order. He was the Jedi the Order failed. The man who shaped everything Kenobi became, who sensed the Order's dark path before anyone else did, was Qui-Gon Jinn. His full story goes to places far darker than most fans realize, and it changes everything you thought you knew about Obi-Wan's training. So watch this video to find out.